Trade business talk, the true cost of your tradespeople. The reason I'm making this video is that lots of tradies and trade business owners, right, and building business owners misunderstand the costs of their tradespeople. It's very easy to misunderstand. It's very easy to underestimate the costs of your tradespeople. I'll explain. Now, I don't want to get tangled up in a discussion about charging for time and charging for value. You charge for value, you charge for a completed job or some work done to standard, and you should be charging a fixed price for a fixed outcome, right, a fixed scope of work. That people don't always. Some people charge doing charge or cost plus. So no, that's not always the way, but that's kind of what you should be doing, okay? But we'll park that for the moment. Whichever way you charge, labour's one of your costs, probably your biggest one. And if you undercharge for it or underestimate how much it's costing you and don't charge enough, then you'll be disappointed in your profitability. Remember, if you run a trade or a building business, you need to make sure it runs profitably. That's your responsibility, okay? That's your job now. Now you're a business owner, not just a tradie. For our purposes today, I want you to understand that you need to put time and energy into understanding your business's numbers, and in particular, the true cost of your employees and your tradespeople as that cost relates to how you charge out for them, because that relationship's important too. Am I laying it on thick enough? I hope so. It's very important, okay? As you transition away from thinking like a tradie and more towards thinking like a business person, a trades business person, but a business person all the same, you'll spend more and more of your energy and your time thinking about those numbers, making sure your profitability is enough, right? And that you've covered all those costs and still have enough profitability left over to cover all the other costs and make you a profit. I'll stick to the costs of your labour today, right? The costs of your skilled tradespeople, and the hint is, of course, it's a lot more than the hourly rate, the headline hourly rate, if you like, that you pay them. I've made a tool called the Tradie Labour Cost Calculator, and it's a spreadsheet. It's fairly simple. It's a simple spreadsheet. It helps you understand how much they really cost you based on how you employ them, and then it helps you understand how to relate that to how you charge for them when you're putting out your quotes or your estimates or whatever. It comes with instructions, so I'm not going to give you instructions here. What I want to do is help you understand how much your people cost, persuade you to get the tool and calculate it properly, their true cost, and then make sure you charge enough margin on top of what that cost is so that you do make a profit. Right? That's the journey I want you to go on. There are a few things that go on here. I want to explain a couple of them to you now to help you kind of understand properly. Now, when you started out, you were probably doing a good amount of the work yourself, maybe even all of it. So your cost of labour kind of in your head is nil, right? You get to keep all the money. Whatever you charge, that's yours to keep. But when you start paying someone else to do some of the work, when you hire somebody, that changes that, right? You've got to pay them whatever it is per hour you've agreed as their wage, and you only make what you charge on top of that. I know this is obvious and and I'm sorry if it's oversimplistic, but it's an important thing to remember. There's a change from when it's you to when you're paying other people. And the more people you're paying, the more it changes. A point I want to make is that you tend to set your charge out rate, right? Whether you charge using an hourly rate or wrap that into products, and I'll come back to that later, you tend to set your charge out rate more by reference to what other people are telling you, external factors, maybe things like what other people are telling you is a reasonable hourly rate to charge, rather than necessarily by reference to what they cost you. And that's where the problems creep in. When your cost base changes, it becomes more and more important to charge enough to cover those costs. Many of you will have a charge out rate that you use to build your quotes, of course, won't you? Some of you will charge using things that you might call pre-builds or assemblies, right? An item, a unit rate, I sometimes call them, which is made up of some labour and some materials and an allowance, and you will count up the units. Electricians will use double power points and light fittings, for example. You might use square metre rates or linear metre rates. And you might say, I'm not using an hourly rate, but there's a rate in there, which is a certain amount of labour at the charge out rate or at the cost with the margin added at the end. If you're using a labour charge out rate that's kind of disconnected from your costs, that becomes problematic. Right? It can also become disconnected from your costs if you kind of started out and then your costs change and you didn't change your charge out rate, right? That can happen too. Remember, the cost of your labour increases as you give people pay rises. So let me walk you through how this works, because if you understand how much your people cost, and it changes depending on how you employ them, and then how that relates to how you charge or how that's affected by how you charge, you'll understand this a lot better, and you'll be able to make informed choices about what to charge. The different ways to employ people, right? You can employ people as employees, where you pay holidays and sick pay and public holidays and super. You can employ people as casual, where you still pay super but you don't pay holidays and sick pay and public holidays, but it's a higher rate. You can pay people as subcontractors, although there are risks involved in that, aren't there? You've got apprentices too, and they're different again. It's complicated. You can charge in different ways too. Like I said, you can charge in fixed price quotes. You can either use those pre-build assemblies that I was talking about, or you can make assessments of how much labour it's going to take and how much materials you're going to have to buy, and add your margins to that. You can estimate the labour, the time people are going to take on it in hours, in man hours, and you can estimate it in days or even weeks. Some people will do that in days or weeks of man hours, or man days if you like. And so they're different, they affect things differently too. You can even charge time and materials, or cost plus, or do and charge, and that's different again. I hope this is making sense. If you have an employee, let's say you're paying this person $50 an hour on the books, so they're getting holidays, sick pay, public holidays. There are 9 in New South Wales. That's 39 days that you're paying this person, and they're not doing any work. That's 8 weeks out of 52. It's not trivial. That cost has to come from somewhere. The way I've calculated it here is we add it onto the other hours that they actually get to be charged out at, right? And make their cost per hour that you charge them out more expensive, to allow for the fact that there are days when you're paying them and they're not working. Of course, casuals and subcontractors don't get paid for holidays. They might get super, casuals do. Subcontractors may or may not. It's easy to see, isn't it, how your employees cost you a lot more than the 50 an hour we were talking about. Perhaps less so for your casuals and your subcontractors. It might feel more the same. However, there's still what I like to call our efficiency measure. That's where I'm making an allowance for the fact that if someone's on a job site all day, they're not necessarily doing work that you've charged for. If you've charged, say you've got a job and it's 8 man hours, it's not getting done in a day, is it? Right? There's smoko for a start, that's half an hour. Right? There's toilet breaks, there's trips to the materials, building materials place to get stuff, there's phone calls, right? There's things that get in the way. That's before you talk about site inductions and safety meetings and customers coming on site causing problems and all that shit, right? So they're not 100% efficient. They're not going to do an 8-hour job in an 8-hour workday. There's time spent doing other shit that you haven't perhaps allowed for in your assessment or your allowance for labour. So their efficiency is not 100%. There's time in everybody's day that's spent doing work that's not usually charged for, not usually allowed for in time allowances when you're charging. There's quite a lot of time spent doing stuff that you wouldn't normally allow for in those pre-builds or those assemblies, or even when you're allowing for labour. It's a bit different if you're allowing whole days, because you would just go, it's 10 whole days, right? Unless your customer doesn't see it that way and says, oh, I don't want to pay for smoko, right? We're getting to the complexities of things now. So the efficiency percentage is very important, right? 20 to 40% of your people's day is spent not doing chargeable work, right? They're good estimates, I think. You should measure, of course, but they're good estimates. 20 to 40% of their time on any given day or any given week, your employees' time, is spent doing work that you're probably not charging for, right? If you are charging for it, all good, then you charge out your efficiency rate to 100%. But if you're not charging for it all, then you need to understand what your efficiency rate is, or at least model it and guess, and adjust your charge out rate or your unit rates, your pre-builds accordingly, to make sure you're making enough profit on the labour component as well as on the materials component. So please grab the calculator, calculate the true costs of your people, understand them as that relates to how you charge, and adjust your charge out rates appropriately so you charge enough. Right? You're a business person now. This is important now. That's your job. So yeah.